What we have is beautiful and you can't destroy it!
Alrighty then.
What can be said about movie tie-in games that hasn't been already? Though they're not as big of a fixture anymore, it used to be back in my day you couldn't spit on a family movie release without accidentally hitting its video game counterpart. In fact, they were once the source of the biggest mixed bag of results in gaming, with titles ranging from actually pretty good to actually pretty get that thing away from me, I have a family. One such movie tie-in title I feel has flown a bit under the radar in terms of its due attention. A game that coincided with the release of Nickelodeon's 2001 hit movie Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius. Though the animated franchise would end up as no stranger to video games, this would be its first official outing. Releasing on multiple consoles, I'd like to specifically highlight the PC version of the game, as I personally remember playing that one as a kid. I figured I was in for a delightful revisit of an old friend, but what I got was... well, let me start at the beginning. Technically predating the movie's United States launch by more than a month, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius made its way to the home computer on CD-ROM in November of 2001, developed by Aw Games and published by THQ. The game would be an open-world collectathon, letting the player explore several areas from the movie, mess around with Jimmy's inventions, and meet all the iconic characters. On paper, it sounds like a blast, but in practice, the results were, What's a nicer word for war crime? Something was really off about all this, and I was kind of overwhelmed. There was so much I didn't remember, like how creepy the player models looked, how the music and vocals would get consistently cut off or overlap, and how Jimmy would passive-aggressively threaten you if you hovered over the quit game option.
Are you sure you want to leave?
No, Jimmy, of course not. It was just a little accident. I was coming up with more questions than answers, and I knew the only way to start trying to figure this game out for real would be to get in contact with someone who would have an inside scoop. Luckily, my immense popularity has blessed me with the ability to reach out to these people with ease. And who better to contact with hard questions than, well, the boy genius himself? That's right, I got Jimmy on the line. Don't ever say I don't do anything for you. You know, it wasn't even that hard to find him. I just looked up the words Jimmy Neutron on Craigslist, and there he was. And I admit, I was skeptical at first, as one might be, but once I heard the voice, there was no denying it was the real deal. Hey, Jimmy, how are things going?
Oh, you know, everything's pretty good here in, Retroville. Just hanging out with, Goddard here.
It was undeniable. I was talking to the boy genius himself. And with that confirmation, I thought I'd ask him a bit about the Jimmy Neutron PC game and how it got to be in the state that it is.
Oh, sure. I can tell you all about that. I remember it vividly. Just to be clear, you said it was a video game?
He was a tough nut to crack. But I suppose he is a genius after all. This was going to be a harder interview than I had anticipated. But I didn't pay this kid $150 to not get my answers. So what is this game? Well, after installing and checking a box that I think is trying to humiliate me, we can see that it actually loosely follows the plot of the movie. And boy, it doesn't get any looser than this. The story is basically that Jimmy is looking to make a science project, so he begins searching around town to collect different parts for it. While this is happening, the Yolkian aliens from the movie are planning their invasion of Earth to capture Jimmy. Why? I don't know. What are you asking me for? Jimmy, comment?
Brain blast?
Isn't he great? And it's the real guy. With that pretty much summing up the whole plot, we're free to get into the gameplay, and ooh, I don't like this. There's tank controls, meaning Jimmy can only really move forward and backwards with slight tilts to the side while running. If you want to fully turn, you have to make a full stop and watch Jimmy do this little soft shoe turning animation before he can take off again. Guess the developers took a good look at the original Resident Evil and thought, this is the way a genius would move. Because of this decision, I feel like I'm constantly scraping my face against every wall to try to get myself straightened out, and the jump isn't much better. Jimmy tilts his whole body unnaturally in the direction you're moving while doing this awkward lunge pose, and while it is really funny to look at, it doesn't really feel great to use. On behalf of the game, I'd like to make a formal apology to anyone with eyes. Yeah, this game isn't a looker. It's the kind of game you'd take to prom out of pity to get a heartwarming local news story written about you. I know that's some cheap shots for a 2001 PC game, but come on, there was plenty released on PC that year and before that didn't look like somebody's rushed student project. Eventually, however, I began getting myself acclimated with the bizarre control scheme as I explored the neighborhood. Given the developer's choice of open-world design, there's a handful of hub areas featuring collectibles of various sorts, including these floating neutrons that refill your health and energy. Red ones being worth even more and getting their own special tally at the end of the game that painstakingly counts each individual one you've picked up. Oh my god. Besides these neutrons, anything else you can find doesn't really affect much other than your final score, only being little things like flowers to fill up flower pots at home or Jimmy's escaped walking fish that you can shrink down and take back to the lab. It is cool that each time you need to revisit an area you've already explored, there's new collectibles to find, but if the reward for finding a lot of these is backtracking to another place just to deliver it, I'm not super jazzed about feeling like I'm constantly running errands. Unfortunately for me, that seems to be the entire design philosophy for this game, and it does get pretty asinine. Here's all that you do. Okay, you go to a location, talk to the NPC there, they tell you to go to another location, then talk to another NPC there. Oh, but sometimes they do break up the monotony. For instance, one part of the game wants you to find Sheen, who you're told is meant to be at the school. When you get there, this kid tells you that Sheen's actually by your house talking to Libby. When you get there, Libby tells you that Sheen is actually downtown by the candy bar. Okay, what is the point of this? Was this some big practical joke that I'm missing? I feel I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't press Jimmy on this.
It sounds like there's a lot of running around, but that's why I have my trusty gadgets, like my hover car, hypercube, robo-locker, x-ray specs, rocket board, warp module, supersizer 5000,
It would take Jimmy listing
duck
over
pogo
260
stick,
inventions
Banshee
for me to
shoes,
realize he
hover
was just
shoes,
reading off of a
Swiss Army
Wikipedia page,
laser,
and that none of
squeegee
these were featured
toaster,
in the
time
game.
booth.
Despite this, Jimmy did have a point. Along with the collectibles, it's possible to find multiple inventions throughout the game that surprisingly add quite a bit. The shrink ray that you get to have out of the gate serves a lot of uses, like nullifying any enemies or helping to collect those runaway creatures. But where I believe things really shine are any that involve movement. The jetpack and Goddard scooter are the next inventions you acquire, and together they almost make me do a complete 180 on this game. They completely fix every issue I had regarding the tank controls, with the jetpack allowing free aerial movement, even deploying automatically before falling from a high height to keep you from taking damage. And the scooter boosts movement speed tremendously, sporting a pretty sizable jump that lets you pass over big chunks of the level if you can pull off the timing. Same goes for the bouncing bubble you find later, pulled from the movie. And eventually in the game you can even get Jimmy's rocket to mess around with. These are all great additions that go a long way to turn the tedium of the back and forth design into a potentially replayable speedrunner's paradise if you know how to use them to break the game in half. Which isn't all that hard to achieve. Just don't land the scooter on Nick's head, it really doesn't like that. Nick? Nick, I'm sorry, please let me come home. Though not all inventions add to the experience. Some others take away, like how trying to use this grappler takes away my desire to go on living. And the baseball, wait, why is the baseball one of the inventions? You didn't invent baseball.
Prove it.
Trying to aim this thing is like a test in human spirit because, oh my god, it will not stop moving when I try to steady my shot. And the aiming reticle is it's absurd. I mean, good heavens. The invisibility tool is alright, works well enough, but just feels a bit situational with it serving no real use in the regular hub world, mostly coming into play when you're aboard one of the alien ships. The game also straight up lies to you and tells you the effect lasts 15 seconds when it really lasts about 8. That just leaves the remote control for Goddard, which you can use to manually steer the robotic dog. Something that's only necessary in one section of the game and to find, I think, one secret at the school, so it's a bit underwhelming. But I do appreciate how there's distinct training modes for each of the inventions, as well as back in the hub world there being new interactables, areas, or methods of exploring unlocked utilizing your new tool. All except for the bubble, which, while it is very fun to use, I think they didn't really know where to put it, so it just kind of sits there on the ground in a place that feels really easy to accidentally miss. The choices of settings aren't bad either, with a lot of the movie's locales being represented, like Jimmy's lab and house, Retroland, even Area 51. The school's here too, but for some reason the inside is cast in this creepy dark cloud. I remember being really uneasy about this as a kid, and I'm not really sure why they did it. They can render a wide open space outside just fine, but for some reason resorted to this inside the school and nowhere else. Oh, actually, that might be a good question to ask Jimmy. Hey Jimmy, why was the school—
I don't know.
Alright. It really feels like the bare minimum was done for sound on this game. While it's commendable that all the voice cast seems to be here representing their characters, you can definitely tell they didn't have much time to record, with every line feeling like they just went with the first take and frantically had to Frankenstein together whatever else they could to make it work.
I need more candy.
And I get it, both takes of Hugh's line here were so good that I'd have trouble choosing between them myself.
Good job, Jimmy boy. Good job, Jimmy boy.
Most of the music featured here never really exceeds about 15 seconds before looping, causing some tracks to get incredibly grating, especially in Retroland where they use dialogue in lieu of music to make the area feel less empty. I don't even know who they got to voice the guy in the car that follows you around in Area 51, but I swear he's half asleep and talking into a cheap laptop microphone.
No civilians are allowed here. Time to go home, little man.
I'm not walking near that car again. Yeah. Speaking of odd vocal choices, halfway through the game, Jimmy asks Goddard a question like he normally does, but Goddard just suddenly answers. For the first time, with a voice that I think is the exact opposite of what anybody would expect it to sound like.
Tell Mom and Dad I love them. Do your best to bring me home. I'll be back.
And like I said before, there's better looking games out there, with a lot of the items and textures just being flat images, and the player models being noble attempts, though compared to the beta version of the Jimmy model, maybe we made it out pretty okay. The AI is incredibly broken too, and it isn't uncommon to see NPC pathing just going wherever it wants, or nowhere at all. There are some cute details underneath all this mess, like areas that don't let you use your jetpack have a no flying sign outside with Jimmy's actual jetpack on it. Or how when standing still, Jimmy will sometimes decide to just scratch his ass, as geniuses are oft to do. Apparently the sound file for the scratching in the game's records is literally labeled as scratchass.wave. Well, I'm glad they were having a good time. But anyway, if you manage to make it through all the jank, you've got about a 2 to 3 hour game on your hands if you take a little time to explore. One that ends pretty abruptly after you rescue your friends from the Yolkians, and earn your reward by watching every single character awkwardly congratulate Jimmy individually.
Way to go, Jimmy.
Always my brightest student. All right, Jimmy!
Let's go, Jimmy.
I couldn't have done it better myself.
I knew you could do it, Jimmy!
But make it through that and you beat the game. Credits roll and the day is...
Let's go, Jimmy. Way to go, Jimmy.
All right, Jimmy!
Oh god, okay, not again. Jimmy, this was a pretty big mess. Do you have anything to say about it?
Well, you know, when you first start out sometimes, you gotta break a few tubes of plutonium to make a nuclear collider. Haha.
Well, you know, that's pretty wise. And I think it might just apply to the sequel game made the following year. Wouldn't you agree?
There's a second one? That's what you said?
Damn, he's good. Released in September of 2002 was Jimmy Neutron vs. Jimmy Negatron, being created by the same development team and having a title that I can't say without nervously tugging my collar. While I did play the original as a kid, I had no idea this follow-up ever even existed, and certainly didn't expect another outing with the same engine as before, considering how it seemed to be barely functioning as it is. For our sequel, this time Jimmy is on a class trip to the museum when he accidentally sends himself to an alternate reality where his evil counterpart, Jimmy Negatron, rules the world. Being the evil one, Negatron decides to travel back to Neutron's dimension to take over that one as well.
I'm going to take your place in your world and change it just for fun, okay?
Now Jimmy must escape this alternate reality and restore his own. A plot that seems a lot more tuned in to the franchise this time, feeling like it could have been an episode of the series, while having some actual tidbits of character and humor in the dialogue.
Why don't you come and play with me while you wait for Jimmy? Okay? Okay, hee hee.
Gone is the open world layout of the previous game. Now things are structured more like a traditional action platformer with a chunk of vehicle sections that keep things from getting stale, even if the vehicle sections themselves sometimes get stale. This is a decision that I think worked out great and really helped showcase some genuinely decent design competency in these level layouts and puzzle challenges. I mean, where was all this hiding before? I wasn't just impressed with the gameplay. All the characters look a lot more natural now, and while we are still using the same models, they have much better animations and polish to their movements. They don't just stand there stiff while speaking to one another anymore, and cutscenes are a lot longer too, being more dynamic for the larger scaled story. Even the sound design's greatly improved in that background music no longer loops every 15 seconds, and instead has much longer songs, some even being catchy enough to hum along to while playing. The voice acting's a lot more solid across the board too, everyone's sounding pretty good here. Though Negatron does get some weird line reads in from time to time.
Hey, Miss Fowl, would you like to see a special mummy? It's a mummy of a bird woman.
They still left the tank controls in for some reason, though the turning speed feels a lot faster and smoother here at least. There's also still plenty of collectibles to be found, including spare parts to help out with this game's version of inventions. Care to explain for me, Jimmy?
Yes, my inventions. You must be talking about my electromagnet or a matter transporter or spoofatrator 4000, neutronic storm trainer, hologram projector, tractor
Once again,
beam
none of
ray,
these were featured in the
homing
game.
device.
But I do really like how they handled inventions in this one, working more as temporary power-ups scattered throughout the levels that you have to collect enough materials for to benefit from, incentivizing exploration by providing a tangible reward for breaking off the beaten path. And while I am missing the flexibility of some of the first game's inventions, the ones here here still have a lot to offer the gameplay, with things like a speed boost, shield, or a radar to help you find surrounding items of interest more easily. Plus, some of the old favorites do make a return in specific levels, operating in the same way they did before. After a certain point, there's some freedom in what order you'd like to tackle these missions, each one feeling like their own mini-episode of the show, with scenarios like Libby getting trapped in a computer program, or Carl growing to gargantuan size and needing to be stopped. You can revisit old locations too, like Jimmy's house and neighborhood, with the latter getting some nice seasonal reskins. Even with all this added content and flair, you're still looking at about a 2 to 3 hour game, but one that stays consistent all the way through. Though it's not perfect, it was really impressive to see just how this team was able to improve on their original structure, rebuilding everything from the ground up while still using the same parts, something that I find to be very commendable, and would love to hear from Jimmy about how it came to be that things improved
Hey,
in
sorry,
such a...
is this gonna take much longer? My mom just made dinner, so...
Oh. Well, maybe I can get your final thoughts on...
Got a blast.
He's a busy guy, so... Though I did pay for the full hour. Looking back, this isn't that bad of a duology, all things considered. As broken as they can be, especially the first one, there was never any part where I really didn't want to keep playing, though that might be in part due to their mercifully short playtime. I was entertained by every ridiculous glitch or asinine design choice to the point where I was fascinated to see more. Then, when the sequel came around, I was taken aback to see just how much the team could improve in only a year's time, fixing a ton of the prior issues while building a much more structured game on top of it. While Jimmy Neutron would go on to get plenty more tie-in games, there's something about these two oddballs that will always stand out to me in the best way. And while they might not be too pretty to look at, or easy to play, or nice to listen to, or simple to understand, or... what was my point again? And while we're wrapping things up, I admit that probably wasn't the real Jimmy Neutron after all. I guess I thought I could be the genius for once by getting the big scoop, but I blew it. But hey, if these games can improve over time, then maybe I can too. I mean, it was only a simple $150 mistake. Could happen to anyone. The important thing is that I learned from it, and that I still have real friends to support me through it. Right, Sheen?
You bet. Go, Ochelot!
You crazy guy. Oh, the fun you can have for only $170.